from the Rambam with some of the explanations of Chassidus, which the Rambam has 10 prakim on Tshuvah, 10 chapters. We're going to discuss the Tshuvah from Tanya, which is also very, very fundamental regarding Tshuvah. And we're going to learn halachas, laws, and customs pertaining to the month of Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Okay. What's this idea in general of Teshuvah, and why is it unique to Chodesh Elul? So we know the reason why Yom Kippur is a time of Teshuvah, a time of kapara. Why did Hashem make this day specifically to be a day of atonement? Is because that's the day when Moshe Rabbeinu came back down from the mountain, and what he had with him was the kapara, the atonement for Kal Yisrael. After the Chet HaEgel, Hashem, the relationship between Hashem and the Yidden came back to the way it was, and perhaps even greater than before. Now this was a process that took 40 days. He went on the mountain after the Teshuvah, after Rosh Chodesh Elul, and he came back for the third time. He went on Rosh Chodesh Elul, and he came back on Yom Kippur. It's 40 days. So these 40 days, says the Shulchan Aruch, becomes the 40 days of Teshuvah. Has a special power of Teshuvah, more than any other time of the year. And in general, this month that we're in is a very positive month. Allah tells us that if someone has a medical procedure that they have to do, or they have some kind of judgment or court case they have to deal with, it's a good idea to do it in the month of Elul, because it's a month of rachamim, a month of compassion. It's a very good month leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. As we know, the king is in the field.
Yeah.
It's therefore also a time to do Teshuvah and to get ready for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we're crowning Hashem as king again, and he's becoming we're entering into a new year. So in Tanya, there's actually 4 parts to Tanya. And Chassidim say that these 4 parts correspond to the 4 parts of Shulchan Aruch. On Shulchan Aruch, we have the first section is called Eir HaChaim, which is the path or the way of life. And that's teaching a Jew how we're supposed to behave from the morning and all through the day. How do you do Shabbos? How do you do Yantif? What's the brachas that you make? How do you behave? How do you pray? And so on and so forth. Everything is in the first section, which corresponds actually to Tanya, which the Sefer Shel Beinanim, the first section, is about how we should behave, how we should deal with our Yetzer Hara, with our evil inclination, and so on and so forth. And then you have the second section of Shulchan Aruch, which is called Yeridea. That talks about areas of kashrus, of shechita, of preparing different, salting different things, and it's a much deeper and perhaps more complicated parts of the Shulchan Aruch of the laws. The second section of Tanya is also more complex and perhaps a little more philosophical than the first. It talks about what we believe in and how we believe, and what's the connection of how the correlation of Hashem's creation to the world is, and so on and so forth. The third section of Shulchan Aruch is called Even HaEzer, and that speaks about laws pertaining to ishus, to women, which is the idea of marriage, divorce, ksuba, marriage contracts, and so on and so forth. Right? Which is more deeper stuff, which essentially has to do with relationships, husband and wife, marriage, and so on. Yidden were compared to, or were analogous to, the wife of Hashem. And our relationship is one that's constant between us and Hashem. Doing Teshuvah is the concept that we're coming back, so to speak, to a better relationship than what we were before. There comes a time during the person's service of Hashem where sometimes we make mistakes, we don't behave the way we're supposed to. We kind of rebel in a way, and we do things that are wrong. And Teshuvah is the concept of mending that, of repairing that, of turning around to coming closer and fixing that relationship with Hashem. Now the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. There's a halacha or a chazal that tell us, Kol ha'isek b'teiras eila ki'ilu hikriv eila. Anyone that's involved in the learning about karban eila, in general offerings, sacrifices, when you learn about them, it's as if you brought those offerings. Today we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but we daven, we talk about it, we learn about it, and when you learn about the inyanim of karbanis, it's considered as if you actually brought those offerings. Similarly, says the Rebbe, if someone learns Igeres HaTshuvah, and someone's involved in learning how Tshuvah works, and what's the idea, and so on and so forth, that is considered as if, or puts him into that category of someone that's doing Tshuvah, because he's learning about it, he's involved in it. Just like it says regarding Karbanis, that when you're involved in Karban Eilah, it's as if you brought the actual Karban. Now, Tshuvah, when you hear the word Tshuvah, there's a lot of feelings or thoughts that come together with it. What does this mean, Tshuvah? Okay? There's the initial reaction or the initial thought that maybe this is the idea of fasting a lot, or Gilgulei Sheleg, where a person is going to roll around in the snow, and he's going to have all different types of pain and suffering, God forbid, and he's fixing his averes or correcting things, paying for his sins, if you will. But in teachings of Chassidus, and in general the way we're taught, it's a lot more, or a lot different, I should say. It's not at all about suffering. It's not at all about this idea where a person is going to go through these hardships and that's going to be his Tshuvah. But Tshuvah is really mending the relationship between us and Hashem. It's fixing that relationship. It's bringing it back to a level and even greater than it was before. You know, Chasidim are called Chasidim, but initially there was a thought that they should be called Balei Tshuvah. People that are doing Tshuvah. Because Tshuvah doesn't just mean the way we use the term very loosely today, someone that came back. Or someone that...
When was this?
Times of the Alter Rebbe. That, you know, people that are doing Tshuvah, they're coming back to Hashem. But Tshuvah is a state. It's a process. It's a relationship between us and Hashem. And in a sense, we would always want to be on that level, in a constant state of trying to return or get closer or deepen that bond between us and Hashem. So let's begin. Igeres HaTshuvah begins chapter Perek Aleph, chapter 1. Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, B'Seif Yuma, the end of Masechta, the volume of Gemara Yuma, which talks about Yom Kippur and Kapara. Gemara says, quotes from a Braisa, Shleisha Chilukei Kapara Heim. There are three types, three categories of Kapara, of atonement. Tshuvah im kol echad. And with each one of these atonement levels, you have Tshuvah that comes with it. So right away you see that there's a difference between Kapara and Tshuvah. They're two different things. Atonement and Tshuvah, returning, are different. Okay? What's the first category? Avar al mitzvahs esei v'shav. If a person transgressed, he missed a positive mitzvah, einei zaz misham ad shemeichal in lei. He doesn't move from there, which means he gets forgiven, but he does Tshuvah. Okay. What's the difference? We know we have two categories of mitzvahs. We have a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment, and we have a mitzvah leis aseh. We have a negative commandment. The positive commandment would be, for example, put on tefillin. You have to put on tefillin every day. A person missed a mitzvah aseh, meaning he missed putting on tefillin on a weekday. Okay. Then you have leis aseh, a negative commandment, which means Torah says, do not do something. Don't eat bread on Pesach. Okay? Don't steal. Don't do something that's a negative thing. And transgressing that means that a person was over, he did it even though Hashem said not to do it. Now, when it comes to the process of Tshuvah, it's important to understand what's the result when a person does something wrong. What happens? So let's say a person did an Aveda. Well, therefore, what happened to the person? Okay, so when a person does a leis aseh, when a person transgresses, he does something that he shouldn't do, he creates a blemish, we'll call it a dirt, in his neshama, in his soul. And that dirt needs some kind of cleansing. He has to get rid of that. Okay? And there's a process through Tshuvah and so on that it could be forgiven, it could be wiped away, it could be cleaned. Okay? The word kapara, the word atonement, really means to wash. Right? The Gemara uses a term, kipurei yadayim, washing of the hands. Okay, so you're washing away that blemish that was created as a result of the negative act that a person did. Okay? And in general, we say that evil does not have a continual existence. It's something which you can get rid of. Okay? You know, when a person, after 120 years, when a person goes to Shemayim, he goes to heaven, so there's a process of cleansing that happens to the neshama. And that cleansing really goes away. After a certain amount of time, they get rid of it. That cleansing is gone. Okay? It says about Rabbi Levi ben Azariah, right? He said, it's as if I'm like 70 years old. Why is it like I'm 70 years old? We say in the Haggadah we mentioned it, right? He said he's like 70 years old. Are you 70 or not 70? So he said, so the answer is, of course, that he's like 70, because when he was 18 years old, they appointed him to be the head of the Sanhedrin, to be the head of the Yidden, and he came home and he was telling his wife that, I don't know if it's, how can I do this? I'm young. His wife told him, it's true, you could do this. However, because you're young, they're not going to accept what you say. They're not going to take you seriously. And overnight, he grew 18 strands of white hair. And all of a sudden, he looked like he was very old and therefore knowledgeable, and he has experience, and they're taking what he says seriously. Okay. But the question is, he's coming and he's telling the other chachamim, he's telling the other sages, I'm like 70 years old, so essentially I have credibility, you should listen to what I'm saying. But you're not 18 years, you're not 70 years old, you're only 18, you look like you're 70, but you don't have the credibility of 70 years. So your argument is not a good argument. When you come and say, accept what I'm saying because I look like I'm 70 is one thing, but you're saying I have the experience of 70, you don't. So the answer is that we have a concept that we know most of the neshamas today, most of the souls that exist today are not new neshamas, meaning they're not the first time in this world. We've been here before. And when we're in when we're in this world before, the next lifetime that we come back, which is now, we take with us all of the positive things that the neshama did in the prior lifetimes. So it adds to the schusim, to the merits, and really to the abilities of the person. You're building on all the prior journeys that your neshama went through. So Rabbi Levi Notik is saying, I'm like 70 years old, meaning I have a continuation of something before. Who was he before? He is the continuation, the Gilgal of Shmuel Hanavi, who was 54 when he passed away. And the continuation of his life went into, or the Gilgal of him went into Levi Notik. So he has the combination of Levi Notik, of Shmuel Hanavi and him. So when he says, I'm like 70, yes, I may only be 18 years old, but those chusim that I have, they're continuing from the prior generation, other lifetimes, in this case, of Shmuel Hanavi. But this only applies to positive things. Averes, sins, negativity, mistakes, they don't have a continuity. They don't go to the next life. Okay? They get cleaned up in the process of Teshuvah and so on, whether the person does it during their lifetime or it's done to their neshama, but they have a cleansing, so that part is gone. So that's the idea of kapara. Teshuvah and kapara are two very different things. Now, if a person did an avera, he transgressed something which is negative, so then you need a cleaning of some sort to get rid of it. But if someone he missed the mitzvah's asay, a positive commandment, what's the result of not doing a positive commandment? Mitzvah. You don't create a blemish in your soul. You don't have some dirt that has to be cleaned. Okay. What happens is
just missed the opportunity.
It's a missed opportunity, but with that missed opportunity comes certain hashbois, certain flows, certain special blessings that come, or energies, or divine light that comes, holiness that gets added to the person when. Just stand up for the Torah. Certain divine energies and holiness that comes to the person as a result of each mitzvah. So if you miss the mitzvah, you could ask Hashem for forgiveness. You could ask Him not to punish and all that, but which is fine, and you'll be forgiven. But you don't get that light that you missed, right? If yesterday a person didn't put on tefillin, and you get a certain spiritual energy or spiritual light as a result of that, and now you're not doing. Now you missed it. You can put on tefillin today, but that's for today. Yesterday, you can't make up for the past. Okay, so again, when it comes to cleaning dirt, that we could do, right? Through kapara, the person achieves atonement, gets washed off, that's fine. But to make up for something that they missed, that's a much harder thing to achieve. It's not something that how do you fix that? Okay, so by way of introduction, I just want to share how this works. If you ever had the experience when you call a customer service, right?
Yeah.
Call customer service, and they tell you, you're trying to get them to do something for you, and they tell you that, sorry, we can't, it's a company policy. You ever had that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Company policy. So what do you say? You tell them the magic word. I want to speak to the supervisor.
Didn't work.
And then the supervisor comes on the phone, and very often he says, okay, for you I'll do it, I'll make an exception, okay, no problem. What happened? For a few minutes, the prior rep was telling you that it's impossible. Right? Sorry, that's company policy. That's how things work, I can't do anything about it. And then all of a sudden, you're speaking to a supervisor, and somehow he could do it. What changed? So what changed is he has the ability to override the process, override the normal system, the order of the way things are designed. The initial person that you spoke to does not have that ability to do so. Normally, when we serve Hashem, there is a certain order, the way things operate, the way Hashem created it. If you put on tefillin on a certain day, you get a certain divine light, certain energy, certain things that happen in the world, certain holiness that's brought, certain elevations, because you are doing that mitzvah. And if you miss that day is gone. Okay? But when a person does teshuvah, teshuvah has the ability to take us beyond that normal process. We reach a level which is beyond the system, how it's supposed to work. A yid connects to Hashem at such a level that Hashem said it doesn't matter about the past. It doesn't matter that you missed that particular day and he didn't eat matzah on a certain day. He could make up for even the energy that had to be achieved or had to flow on that day during that mitzvah, that particular time. He could get it now also through teshuvah. Now teshuvah is a state.
Repentance.
How does the teshuvah work? Well, repentance is not really the right
No, I mean,
translation.
you
Really, it
missed
should be
the
return.
day.
Oh, return.
What?
You missed the day. How did that happen? It
do you make
doesn't
it up?
matter that you missed.
He said, how
It
do
does
you
not.
make
Oh,
it back?
it matters. But when the level of the power of teshuvah is such that it allows to fulfill something which normally you had to do it. Let's say matzah on the 15th night of Nisan, at a particular time, in a particular way, in a certain measurement, with a bracha and a kavana, and you eat the matzah, then you fulfill the mitzvah.
Right.
But if a person missed it,
Yep.
okay, so forget punishment. It's not about punishment. Okay, he did teshuvah, but he wants to get whatever you get as a result of eating matzah.
Yeah.
You can't, because you missed it. So we're taught that through teshuvah, a person reaches such a state in a relationship with Hashem, and such a closeness, and you're reaching so high that Hashem could give it to you even though it's not the 15th day of Nisan, and even though you're not eating matzah, and it's not Pesach, and you missed it. Okay? So it's two different paths. When a person is doing teshuvah for missing a positive mitzvah, or a person is doing teshuvah for transgressing a negative mitzvah. These are two very, very different roads that have to be achieved, two different methods of how they work. And this is, by way of introduction, this is what the Brisa is telling us, that there are three categories of teshuvah, of kapara, of atonement, and teshuvah with each one of these categories. Okay? So number one, if a person missed a mitzvah aseh, okay, he gets forgiven. If he does teshuvah properly, he asks Hashem for forgiveness, and he's forgiven. He's not going to be punished. God is very kind, and he's sincere about it, and he's what?
Make a reverse. Reverse I am invention. Oh shoot.
So when a person misses a mitzvah, he asks Hashem for forgiveness, and he's forgiven. It's done. He didn't fulfill yet what he missed, but he's clean, so to speak. He didn't do it. He has a clean slate. He was forgiven. Then you have a second category. If he was over al mitzvahs leisaseh, he transgressed something negative. He did something wrong. Vishav, and he returned. He's doing teshuvah. Then teshuvah toila, his teshuvah is hanging, so to speak. It's there, and it waits until Yom Kippur. And then on Yom Kippur he receives atonement. So there's a certain pending process, if you will, where the Tshuvah is there, but the ultimate kapara, Yom Kippur has to come in order for him to achieve that atonement or that washing, if you will. Okay. Okay, so our issue now is that for Leisa say we know how it works. A person transgressed, he did something wrong, now he did Tshuvah, and through a process of Tshuvah and coming to Yom Kippur, it'll be washed away, that negative, that blemish on his neshama. But what is the process to reach the level of Tshuvah where we could fill a void from the mitzvahs aseh that we missed? Okay? We said you could reach a level in Tshuvah where you're overriding the system, where you could reach a level where you could actually achieve it even though you missed that opportunity. How do you do that? There's a term that says it's a lack that you can't fix. Right? The day is gone. How does that process work? Okay. So much so that Chazal tell us, our sages tell us, that mitzvahs aseh is really to Hashem more valuable and more important than the mitzvahs leis aseh. In other words, don't say, okay, what's the big deal? I missed it. Didn't do anything wrong. It didn't hurt anybody. It's not the case. Mitzvahs aseh is a very, very important thing. And don't look and say, look at the process. If a person does a mitzvah, it misses a mitzvah, and he does Teshuvah, it says, Hashem forgave him. Mitzvahs leis aseh is a lot harder to achieve. You have to wait till Yom Kippur and get forgiven if you did Teshuvah. So what seems to be more important? Positive or negative?
Well, I say dos and los, I say.
Oh, very good. Okay. But from a Teshuvah perspective?
Well, it shows. How could that be?
Okay.
It's harder to do Teshuvah with mitzvot lo taseh than aseh.
Correct. It's harder to do Teshuvah from a leis aseh. But, as Shalom is saying, and let me explain that, on the one hand, if you look at the definition of Teshuvah, if you miss the positive commandment, it's a much easier Teshuvah. Right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you, right, because you get forgiven right away. On the other hand, we have a principle that aseh deicha leis aseh. A positive commandment pushes away a negative commandment. For example, a bris. Okay? Is a person allowed to have a bris on Shabbos if it's the 8th day? Mm-hmm. They can. Now, technically speaking, the act of the bris is forbidden on Shabbos.
Right.
There's machlekes of what the Gemara has a machlekes of what is the actual prohibition, whether it's schita or petza, whatever, causing bleeding, whatever it may be. But there is a prohibition happening here because that medical procedure is not allowed on Shabbos. But Torah says, because there's a positive commandment which tells us go and have a bris on the 8th day, even though Shabbos prohibits it, the mitzvahs aseh overrides the mitzvahs leis aseh. Okay? It supersedes that. So if you think about it from that component, then mitzvahs aseh is more important or more valuable because it can push away even a negative mitzvah. Okay. So obviously there's much more to this process of Teshuvah and so on. Okay. Now, why is mitzvahs aseh so important? Because through doing a positive mitzvah, a person brings upon himself a shefa, a light, and a flow into the higher worlds from a shine of Hashem's infinite light. Okay, what do we say before we do a mitzvah? Make a bracha. What's the bracha that we say? Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu. Right? You sanctified us with your mitzvah, and you commanded us. So what's happening through the process of the mitzvah is an extreme holiness, even in higher worlds, for a shine from Hashem's infinite light. Okay, and therefore, if a person missed it, he missed the opportunity, and you can't make up for it. It's the next day. And that's why it is a term in Chazal that Viter HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Viter Hashem even on stuff like Avodah Zarah and so on, but he wasn't mevater on someone that misses a positive commandment because of that holiness that it achieves to the person. Okay, let's get to Teshuvah. So, according to Torah, in halacha, okay, Mitzvah Teshuvah min HaTorah is azivas achet bilvad. The person says, and we'll learn this more in Rambam in the coming days, but Teshuvah in its own right means he left the Avera. He says, I'm not doing it anymore. Okay? He's sorry that he did it, and he's not going to go back to that Avera. Okay? Which means he makes a firm decision in his mind, in his heart, I'm not going back to that behavior anymore. I'm not going to rebel anymore against Hashem. Okay? And I'm not going to do anything contrary to Hashem's command, whether it's mitzvahs essay or mitzvahs leis essay. That part's the same. You know, why is a traitor so hated? Why do we look so bad at a traitor?
Because he's anti.
Because really, he's one of us, right?
Yeah.
But one of us, and he went against Hashem. If a guy's a stranger and he did something wrong, okay, you never expected any better in the first place. But here you're talking about an individual who is expected, or you think is with you, and then he goes and turns against you. Okay. Yidden have a relationship with Hashem. When we go against Hashem, when we rebel, it's a very negative thing. It's what are you doing? Hashem is we're his children, and you're going against Hashem. So, step one is to make a firm decision not to do it again. I'm not going to rebel against Hashem. And this step one applies in halacha to any type of mitzvah. It doesn't matter what we're doing teshuvah for, positive, negative. Number one is, I'm not going to do this again. Okay, you can't start a teshuvah process if in your mind you don't say, I'm dropping this behavior. Okay, step one is to stop. And this is not like what most people think, that teshuvah is fasting. There's a common misconception, even when it's brought, in Navi, in prophets, it says, you should turn to the Eibishter. Now there are Nevi'im, where it says, like in Elul it says, that it's through fasting also. But fasting is getting rid of certain problems that Eden had. They were suffering, that was a different level. The Navi said fast to get rid of those sufferings that were existing. But for the Teshuvah aspect to it, from the Teshuvah component, it's not about fasting. It's about turning to the Eibishter and saying that he's not going to do it anymore. Okay, and therefore, if you look in Rambam and in Smag, they don't bring at all the idea of the concept of fasting. It's not part of the Teshuvah process. Stand up for the Torah again.
Is that where we were standing the first time also?
Yes, very good.
Oh, okay. Better late than never.
Okay, so again, the fasting component that exists is to get rid of suffering that's a result of the sin. But it's not for Teshuvah. Okay? To get rid of the Gzeira, the decree, that's the fasting part. But the Teshuvah part is turning to the Eibishter. Okay? So, step one is dropping the Avera, deciding not to do it. Step two is turning to the Eibishter and just returning to it, serving him, greater than before. Now, when a person does their part, and we go on our own, we put in our effort, it creates a mirror effect from the Eibishter. There's a certain principle known as Kamayim HaPanim L'Panim Kein Lev HaAdam Ala Adam. Okay, in Mishlei, which means like this: just like water works with a mirror effect. If you look at water, what do you see? A reflection of yourself. Okay. What? If you look at water, you see yourself in the water. You see, it's a mirror.
Sometimes, right? Yeah, okay.
Our relationship with Hashem also works that way. When we behave towards Hashem in a certain way, there's a mirror response to us. So if a person is doing Teshuvah and he turns to Hashem, okay, there's a response back from the Eibishter in a similar way. Okay? So when a person goes and does Teshuvah to Hashem, it's not that he fasted. He's returning. He's sincerely stopping what he did, and he's saying he wants to deepen that connection with Hashem. He wants to turn to the Eibishter out of love and serve Hashem. This causes a response back from Hashem in a similar manner. Morning. Okay. In addition, a person needs to do what's called the vidui, which means he has to confess, not to humans, right, but to Hashem of what he did. Okay, so a person says what we say in Tachman, we say Hashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, right? That process is vidui. He's saying, I did something wrong, and he regrets that he did it. He's not going to do it again. Okay. So when a person makes a strong resolve within themselves not to go back to what they did, and he turns to the Eibishter and he wants to get closer, and the Eibishter responds in kind, and he does the vidui process where he says Hashem Nevagadnu and so on, he confessed his averes to Hashem, that's where he has his kapara, his mechila. Okay. But then there's another level where really you have to wash away this blemish completely. Washing away this blemish entirely, that has to go through a process. That's why we say there's Teshuvah, and then you wait till Yom Kippur, and on Yom Kippur, that's where the atonement is achieved. I want to stop here for a moment and see if there's any questions.
Yeah. Is what you're saying now basically straight from this part of Tanya?
Most of it.
Because it's all very, very familiar. So look over, that's where I learned.
Okay, very good.
Okay, good.
Okay, any other questions?
At the moment.
So, there is no actual kapora according to Rebbe? Required? Like
There is.
You lose something or
There is. He's going to get into it more about what the Yisurim does for the person,
Oh, you see.
what that causes. Now, he could avoid that and get to Yom Kippur and get rid of that, but that's really what the kapara is needed for, according to Gemara. In other words, there's a Tshuvah element, but then there's how does the cleansing happen? What causes that? What brings the person to a higher level, a little bit more refined?
Well, wait, I'm forgetting it. Now, where does the Torah happen in the first part of what you said? It sounded like Torah comes before Teshuvah, and now it sounds like it comes after.
It comes after Teshuvah Toila. Yeah, Teshuvah starts right away, but the kapara happens on Yom Kippur.
Just on Yom Kippur.
Yes. He could be forgiven, but to wash away any blemish, there should be no remnants
That's
of
what
what
kapara is.
happened. Yes. Kapara, another definition of kapara, it's atonement, but it means to wash away. The washing away the negative part that existed. Follow?
So what if there are things we need to do Teshuvah, but we forgot about them, we don't remember them?
We have as part of the tefillah on Yom Kippur is this idea, things I don't know. Right?
Forgot.
That's part of what we do during the whole month of Elul. We try to make an account and go through our year and say, where are we up to? How are things? What's happening and so on.
What does it mean, Teshuvah me'ava? From love.
Okay. It's a high level of Teshuvah. A person's doing it not out of fear of punishment or whatever, but he's reaching a level where his love to Hashem is so strong it's a much higher, much better level. Oh, 1 second. We have to mention it. This shir is the schus before Shlema for Michal Mesodi Bas Mikri Naomi. And I want to thank Zayar for setting up the breakfast and the video and managing and all that. What?
We're supposed to be hearing you now.
I said the shir is the schus before Shlema for Michal Mesodi Bas Mikri Naomi.
Amen.
And I want to thank Zayar for setting up, preparing breakfast and putting it all together.
Absolutely.